The 8:30 turn, and with all the restrictions we've already discussed about, the fog has thinned, which means artillery firepower goes up to full, but the range is only 4 hexes. Cav charge distance goes up to 4 hexes. That gets rid of any silliness. That silliness only really existed for the light cav, but whatever. No reduction in movement allowances in the thin fog, and okay, Charliers I don't use anyway, so no big deal there. My skirmishers were able to function completely normally. We got some reinforcements coming. Davout's got a little bit more, and we got more of Sewell coming on. Sewell looks like he's heading this way, but he's not. He's heading up this way. Cav's supposed to work. I'm in range that I could launch a charge. What does that upslope mean? I don't know. I'll get a penalty going up. Let me, this is where I get myself in trouble, is I wait to ask a question until on the line there, Cav retreat. There may be prohibitions for charge movement. This is not a ridge. I don't know if I have ridges. Doesn't look like there are any in this scenario. These are slopes. I don't think it's going to do much, except it's going to subtract 1 from the base cav strength. Now, if I look at these cav, wow, these are heavies. We're looking at, oh no, they're lights. I see the 8 morale, and I think that's the movement. No, these are lights. So I may have a bonus anyway. No, mine are lights too. So I'm looking at 5 each. That'll be 4 each because of the slope. Times 2. Well, times 6, if I do the whole thing, comes out to 24. Whereas this will be, that can't be right, can it? Is it that much bigger? No. 10, 20. 2, 4, 6. 24 to 20 doesn't seem right. These should be the same size. So 8 and 8 is 16 and 24 versus 20. Yeah, I guess we'll have to charge the whole force. Now, we don't have to declare what we're charging first, which means I could come here 1, 2, oh, sorry. Flip. 1, 2. This would be the time to form a square. If I form a square, though, I am in trouble if the infantry moves. I think what I need to do is I need to roll the counter charge here. Try to prevent those cav from hitting. So we'll do that. If I can find my gray dice. There they are, hiding. And each has to make a check. 8 morale. Top one fails. Second one succeeds. So we end up, this actually does move and goes into a countercharge. Okay. That is immediately resolved, but will stop this charge no matter what. So we'll take advantage of this. This is not an optimal situation by any means. I'm attacking with 10 to 30. Okay, how ugly that has turned, which is 1 to 2 or less. This is not going to be good. And we got any modifiers? No leaders, no. The Prussians take a D1 and the French take a 1. The French do not necessarily want to disorder because, see, I'm still in trouble because this thing can now countercharge anybody who moves within range of it. But if it's just skirmishers, that's okay. See, one of the problems with the fatigue rolls, I have a marker under Sewell to indicate that his force is fatigued. It has a penalty to it. You don't want to accumulate those penalties, but it would not be unreasonable for me to want to have Sewell stacked with a unit at the same time as he has that. If that happens, well, this counter is sitting in just such a position that it looks like he's disordered the unit. And there's no real way to tell that the unit's not disordered if you do that. I guess you could stack Sewell under the force, and as long as he's at the bottom, it doesn't really hurt. Or you could put that marker as kind of an aside, but it could easily end up looking like something that doesn't belong. Now, the fact that it's a turn 1 disorder, that's kind of interesting how long that unit. Oh no, that's a fatigue. Yeah, there I am. I'm looking and saying, wow, that's kind of interesting. That's a turn 2 disorder. How did that stay so long? No, it's turn 1. Anyway, that is that. So Davout is setting up his infantry to deal with the newly formed line up here. Mainly we want to scare away the cav, so I'm in square where I can. I've thrown some artillery up to try to screw around with some of that cav, and some cav here for a potential countercharge. It's not a great one though, because it's lights it's lights versus mediums over there. Over here, I'm continuing with a light pressure, and also trying to increase the strength of that unit. And I can get rid of this now. That no longer is necessary. That reminded me I couldn't do anything with those guys. They had charged. It would have been past the charge phase, but I could have moved them otherwise. Mainly continuing my pressure with skirmishers and Sewell coming up on the other side. This is really a matter of I don't really want to put a lot of pressure because my own units might get hurt, and these guys might get sped along on their way with disorders and whatnot, which, you know, means that I wouldn't gain as much ground. I do want to put a little concentration, including this artillery, against the village, because villages are hard to dig out, and it can only fire out with 1, so I feel fairly safe exposing my artillery there. Kind of a technical problem that wouldn't happen if I was playing opposed, because each player would have their own casualty sheet. But because the units are largely identified just by this number, and those numbers are repeated on both sides, and this is something that's just problematic in the system when you solo. I ended up accidentally marking some French when I should have been marking some Prussians. And who knows, you know, that might be happening elsewhere too. I think I'm okay. What happened, other than me not paying attention, was I had the Auerstaedt clipboard on top of these others. Normally I've got the French on top of the Prussians. That's all good. Auerstaedt is over there. That's fine. Too many different battle sheets. And, you know, that shouldn't happen. in general. You shouldn't, well, it would if you're playing any of the combined scenarios where there's really, you have 3 different sheets for the casualties. Although the Prussians are duplicated across them because their forces could actually be coming from different directions or something. And there may be something that allows sort of a free setup where the French could be coming from different directions. If you're using that kind of weird modular thing or something, maybe that's possible, where you pick one piece of the map, one little section of the map, a rectangle on the map, and you declare, well, I've got this, and kind of playing Go or something on the map to determine where people can set up. That may work better in certain scenarios. The Waterloo thing, for example, it might work pretty well on. Here, wow, I don't know, because it's not a situation where the troops are nicely deployed ahead of time. And, you know, there's just so much stuff that I don't know how those scenarios work, to tell you the truth. I haven't read through them carefully enough. But, you know, the surprise situation here couldn't be reflected in that. It just wouldn't happen. So it's like those scenarios more or less set you up with, yeah, you're allowed to do this. I don't know about the free setup one. Here I go. This is why these vids ended up so damn long, because I have to take a look now and see, well, now wait a minute. Yeah, so this has specific deployment rules as well. So it's kind of one of the problems, like, that's a build your own scenario, and nobody would do what the Prussians did, and there's no way to generate that with that kind of situation. So it just seems weird, but then again, you know, so do these what if scenarios where it's like, yeah, but let's assume the Prussians gathered their army and placed it however the fuck they wanted, you know, and outsmarted Napoleon completely in terms of the deployment instead of just completely botching everything. I still have this map to go for. No, I think I fired my shot there, which means we're done with the French side of this turn. Now, what you'll notice is that there's duplication here. These turns are already on the historical scenario. So, you know, the Prussians have some weird rules here that I don't know what they're going to mean. They may, the discrimination that says this line can't move, I don't know what the fuck that means, because I've applied this weird thing where I allowed the cav to move out ahead. I don't think I'm going to be allowing anything but the cav to engage, and the cav probably doesn't want to engage on its own. Screwy recording failures, but this one happened early on. I wrote some orders for Hohenlohe, and he's going to try to defend a line from Auerstaedt up to Krippendorf. That's a lot of space to cover, but I got the woods in between that we're probably not going to see fighting in the woods. That's not a good place to be in general, forest. It's going to have units in general order, which means they don't have a lot of firepower. On melee, the attacker is not in good shape. So as long as I cover the forest with some units, nobody can slip through. Though I don't know if I have enough units to cover it right now, because what I'm looking at is covering this broken terrain here, the village, and the goal of all of this, and part of the orders, is to make sure that the road to Weimar, where my reinforcements are coming, is covered, and the road to Auerstaedt is covered. This may be too much to do. My hope is, as the troops come in from Weimar, I'm going to change my orders and shift my way up towards Auerstaedt and maybe get my army combined. This appears to be perfectly legal. It doesn't really follow the orders that maybe Hohenlohe was given. He doesn't have any real capability to do much except defend, and he has a smaller force than Napoleon. So the idea of withdrawing seems a wise one. It may have been beyond what Hohenlohe felt he was allowed to do, though. So I may be cheating a little bit in the favor of the Prussians here. But what I'm figuring is Davout has a hard enough time already that, if I can do a movement to support Brunswick's forces, and maybe the French will come off the board and cancel out my units or something like that. I don't know if those count as dead units. I don't think they do. So that would keep my army in a weird sort of state, and I may have to recalculate what the 2/3 is or whatever, based on units that are just like considered to be between the two maps fighting. Fuzzy area, got to figure that out. But yeah, what that means is I'm concentrating the division that I was allowed to move both divisions, but Hohenlohe is not in a position yet to move these guys. So, we're hoping these guys are going to buy enough time for that second column to move up and help defend the Krippendorf line there. I got to keep this road protected, and I got to keep this pathway protected as well. Now, my reinforcements will be coming from here, so that shouldn't be too hard. I hope. They're not coming for a while, so yeah. We'll see. Over here, I mainly just withdrew, and you can see fatigue markers in place. I'm trying to get myself into a position. The cav is free to operate. It's only that line here that had any kind of restriction on it. But yeah, and it's also possible that if Davout is not really crushing it over here, I might be able to divert some forces, if I can find it, to wherever, what is this called? Dada, which I believe is where my troops are coming from. I might well be able to fall back from there. So, the idea here is to try to get my two armies or my two forces into one place, whatever that means. And, if I can get my main army facing Napoleon, all right. If I can get my main army over here on the Auerstaedt map, all right. It's just fighting two disjunct battles doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And that's going to move us to, not right here, but to the 9 o'clock turn over here. And I'm not sure. I think these are all 9:30. I'll look that up and make sure that that's not like a 9 and a 9:30 that got bumped. A little lax with orders, not on this map so much, but over here Davout hasn't had any, and he's supposed to have some. I'm going to sit with that as it is because he was in this position more or less, so I guess it's okay what I've done so far. Next turn, his orders go into effect, though, which is going to be to swing up and try to just roll up that flank. It seems obvious, especially since there's movement restrictions on the Prussians. The only problem is there's a lot of cav here, and they're going to cause problems because I don't have much cav. We'll see how painful that is. The other option would be to try to cut across this way, and then I'd be exposed to the cav in my rear, and that doesn't sound pleasant. I don't want a horse in my butt. A bunch of them, actually. We've got reinforcements coming on as well, And, you know, I mean, Davu's getting tired here, and for that matter, Sewell is as well. Sewell actually is at a penalty. I considered I may end up resting. I don't know. I got more of Sewell's core coming, though, so it's like, if you don't keep marching, because fatigue isn't handled on a per unit basis, it's handled on a core basis, it's a little bit more painful. Like, what I'd like to do is rest these guys up more or less. Their orders have largely been defeated by the Prussians falling back. Yes, I can kind of harass a little bit, but the way I wrote my orders, it's to outflank this town, and, you know, if the Prussians keep falling back, I'm not going to be able to pursue them. So I wrote them some new orders, but those orders haven't reached yet. Now, instead of what you're supposed to do in this system, and it's very intuitive really, is I guess you grab one of these order counters or something and send it off towards a unit. Well, it doesn't tell you which unit it's going towards. And with written orders, that kind of doesn't make sense. So I'm stealing a page from the essay series, NBS, CWB, whatever. And just counting how far away I am and saying, yeah, it'll take that long to get there. So it's going to take a turn to get there, which is about right. It might actually be more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. It's 1 hex off. I'm just going to fudge that because Sewell is moving up and whatever. If I was doing it the way you're supposed to in the game, the orders would reach in time. And that's why I'm kind of fudging it. I would rather not just put the orders, I would rather not try to deal with this extra mechanical aspect, but I know what's going to happen. And those orders are actually to slice up this way and then back down. We're going to send the main force forward. They've got some time to Krippendorp. I could throw some new orders to them right now, but I got to think. Maybe I got someone else who needs orders more, because I could just walk Napoleon up to Lan and give him orders without giving up any kind of positional advantage that I have by having Napoleon kind of at the center of the army. Might also want to send some orders at some point at least to the guard. Without committing them, I can move them someplace and have them defend a flank or something along those lines. So, you know, that's a pretty safe goal. Then over here, I'm in range that I can do a cav charge on that infantry, and that seems like a pretty good idea. So that's kind of what's going on at the beginning. I got to figure out, you know, I pick up the camera and I start thinking more than I do just, I don't know. By speaking to myself, I start thinking a little bit more, and that's somewhat helpful. So I'll look over my orders, make sure that I'm getting enough out, because only sending one order doesn't make sense. I should be more flexible given that I have Napoleon. At the very least, I'm going to send an order to the Imperial Guard to do something. But I suspect one of these two also could use better orders than they have. I'm not sure. Problematic, and again, because Auerstaedt is not supposed to have a scenario that runs you from the opening moves into the historical. But again, there are scenarios that link both maps, and they start at that 6 a.m. as the turn 1. Here we have turn 1 at 6 and turn 1 at 8. This is turn 7, and that's what I want to record. This unit just disordered during its attempt to convert to a square, and that's problematic. The cav is going to do a number on that, I believe. Things are starting to get messy. Sewell having this long trailing column behind, but we're moving up there. And I'm a little worried about fatigue issues, honestly. But I also feel like I ought to be taking advantage of the Prussian disorganization, etc. So, you know, Sewell is got a fatigue penalty. Ney's got a fatigue penalty. Aguilera is close to one. Lana's fine, you know. He's been recovering. He's got 2 points towards one. He's launching an attack overall, though, but it's, again, not a really intense one. I don't want to take casualties, so I'm using my skirmishers and moving artillery up into place. Well, we'll see what happens, but what I'd like to do is be able to pursue units that are disordered rather than, you know, face things that have actual firepower. Just because it's so easy to get kind of hurt in this system. Like, taking a hit means you make a morale check, and sometimes you can take 2 hits hitting some of these units. I don't know how good these guys are. A pair of 3s, you know, if I didn't advance right up the middle and went to the sides, it might be okay, because that would only be 1 casualty each, but dragging my feet, I guess. And then over here, I probably shouldn't have been attacking, simply because I'm kind of violating what I said about the orders. Hey, I just wrote the orders. Yeah, they shouldn't be in play yet, but screw it. I should have known to write those orders at that point. And also, I mean, my intention was not to move, but then confusion took place. And, you know, it's what I should have been doing. It's just, well, whatever. And I didn't have to check for orders or anything like that. So now we get any return fire, which isn't a whole hell of a lot. It's this disordered unit gets to shoot. I guess I'll go for the cav. That's the more painful. Cav is powerful in this system, so that's the more painful thing to try to inflict a casualty with. Plus, the cav units are small, which means you might be able to knock them out of the game. Not with 1 shot. 1 point shot, but and then some of my artillery is in play, but I've got to deal with those skirmishers. Things, because the stack is getting full again. Prussians did their return fire. They didn't really do anything. They don't have a lot of it, just a couple shots. Plink over there and a little bit better up there, but not much. Now I'm looking at the French fire, and one of the things I did was I set myself up so I'm flanking here, thinking that would do me some good. I can't find an impact to flank fire. Flanking, I would have expected at least a +1 or something on it. Flanking is applicable. Oh, wait, no, here. Melee and fire. It's in the melee section. This is... yeah. So I think what we're going to be looking at is a morale penalty if a morale check is performed, which I expect, right? If you attack on the flank, it has a reduction to its defensive capability, which again makes sense. But the big thing was the morale check of being flanking fired, and I was expecting that. I expected to see it in the fire section, not in the melee section, or, you know, here's another thing. It could have been in a segmented, separate little rule about whenever you're attacked on flank. But I kind of expected it to be in both. Nah, they stuck it in the later one and only under melee. And that's the kind of disorganization that makes me grumpy. You know, that's the kind of thing that I'm complaining about. I only ran into this by seeing this serendipitously. You know, I saw flank and rear attack and dismissed it because, yeah, I'm under melee. No, it's not there. You know, I don't necessarily pay attention to every word when something's in the wrong section. But anyway. So yeah, French fire, and then we'll take care of the charge. I don't think there's any other melees that I'm doing. Well, I got the potential of throwing these guys in as well. There may be problems with doing that though. The mixed melee, I think, causes issues. I had to check something troublesome here. So I've got skirmishers here. I don't think they're allowed to be there. Because when an enemy cavalry enters a hex adjacent to a Voltigeur, the Voltigeur is simply reintegrated with no fire. That read strictly, I'm fine. I popped it out, moved it in next to the cav, but I don't buy it. The reason is that the cav could opportunity charge and destroy the Voltigeur. So I am going to throw those guys out of there and just say they aren't there. The only reason I even checked that roll was I caused a casualty with those. And I'm like, ooh, I don't know if a bunch of skirmishers could sneak up on some horses that are facing them especially. If they weren't facing, I'd be a lot more iffy about it. But yeah, I just don't buy that you can do that. And again, it's not covered in the rules that way. You got to make up your own sometime in this. I was so excited about my cav charge, but I have fire, including flanking fire, on a disordered unit. That caused a casualty, and it caused a disorder. Now, a disordered unit disordered under the base rules is destroyed. However, I'm playing with the route rules. So what happens is it gets a rally chit. Actually, it gets two of them. I don't know why it really needs two. I guess to distinguish because it's routed. It has to retreat each turn or something like that. It gets two of them at 9 now, which means it won't be until turn 11 that I'm able to start rallying that guy. But he suffers some effects as well. It'll retreat with its whole movement allowance each time it fails a morale check, as well as when it's hit. And it has basically no capacity at all. So we'll flip that over. 1, 2, oop. We'd be getting opportunity fire there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's what we've got going. And that, it's not off the board, it's not destroyed. And what that's going to do is that's going to get rid of this charge. And I'm allowed to reposition. I was facing that way. I think I'd rather be facing this way with that whole force. Which means we won't get the melee. Well, any melee. Right? Yeah. Things are getting messy enough where, the amount of number counters that are spread around. Hey, I'm not too worried about the Prussians, but well, they're the only ones disorganized here, are getting kind of complex enough that it's hard to determine what the hell everything is and what's going on. Do I have any rallies that are possible? And I look around and I'm like, I don't know, who's who, what's what. I don't think that I have any. I already took care of that and recovered that, which means we're going to be moving to the Prussian side of this, which is, I think, this turn here, 9 a.m., where the units come in. And I don't think there are any over there. Okay. Beautiful day out there. My body's going to shit because I'm not doing anything. I'm not going to go dancing tonight because New Year's Eve, they've got a band in for until midnight, and then my normal dancing starts. But, it would cost me like 3 hours of walking to get 2 hours of dancing in, and that doesn't seem worth it. But it's just so hard to motivate myself to go outside, even though I know I should. I might even enjoy it more, but I might also be miserable, and whenever I'm faced with, that kind of choice, I'm like, well, I can just bury myself in abusing myself more by smoking and lying around and eating and whatnot. Anyway, back to the game. Got some reinforcements. Third column coming in here under Brunswick. At some point I have to write him some orders, but they're not going to be able to be implemented until this column crosses the line. I've got to have orders before that, but I'd like to delay making any kind of decision, really. However, I am in a position where I could launch cav charges, and seems like a good time to do so. First thing I have to do is probably scare this thing away, and then I can start causing some problems with the French line. So we're going to see a sequence of cav charges over there. Over here, I don't know what's happening. I mean, you know, this is all in disarray and falling apart. I think these guys are going to be able to start pulling back very shortly. And I've got my orders for Hohenlohe, and that applies to everything on the board. So, you know, it's really just a matter of trying to make some kind of reasonable defensive line up there. This isn't cavalry, it's artillery. I thought it was cav sitting there. It can still charge. I've got units back here, but, you know, it's just so hard for me to distinguish the units. And, you know, I mean, I can see the difference. It's not that. It's that on a quick view, you have to be able to distinguish things quickly, right? On a quick view. And here I've got a fucking... Why does it have a melee value? I thought most of them don't. Now I'm really confused. Because I thought, like, that was one of my features to determine it, is... No, they've got melee value. Okay. Yeah. So, I don't know, you know. You're going to see crazy shit like that happen as long as the counters are going to confuse me. It's not that big a deal, but man, it is not how I would be set up. Because of all the configurations in the optional rules, and it's not just like, oh, here's the advanced game, you know, so that you could put some modifiers down here for advanced. They've chosen to leave the advanced rules off of all the charts. So what we've got is a countercharge happening from lights to medium. That's at a -1. So it's actually at the 2 to 3 table at -1. This is not a good result, but at least it stops one of the cav from charging. And that's a particularly bad result. Point, quite often in games, it's pretty easy to have, you know, the board mostly fit your table. I got a little room for my rules, whatever. But with reinforcements coming on and everything, it's becoming more and more difficult to find a place to leave the pile of written orders and combat results, the damage charts and all that in play. I mean, it's a minor factor, right? You know, but it's something I used to remember more easily. I was more familiar with playing these kind of games. I would almost always have a side table where I could easily reach those things. Up here, for whatever reason, I'm finding it tighter. I mean, you know, this has a lot of... This is taking 3 maps. One of the things is these hexes are so big, because of the double-sized counters that have to fit in them, that the game takes up twice as much space or whatever in every direction. So, you know, in square footage, 4 times as much space, as you would expect, right? This is not a lot of map, but because of the decisions on, you know, and there's so much information on the counters, I don't know if there's an easy way around it. NBS gets away with normal size counters, normal size hexes. Some of that information is more baked into the record keeping stuff. Here, all the information tends to be on the counters. Why do I, you know, is that good or bad? Well, if there's not a lot of information on the counters, if there's a small number of numbers on the counters, it makes them easier to read for the things you know they need to have. So, on NBS, you don't have the firepower strength on the counter. You don't have, you do have the morale, I think. You have the type, that's pretty important. And you have the designation clearly written. Here, the designation is just one of many little things. Like, no, the actual designation is very hard to read. So you have the numerical designation, and I've already raised some concerns about that. In essence, the components to this design, I think, are kind of problematic. They put so much information on the counters, which usually is a good thing, right? Not having to look stuff up. But if you got to look stuff up and you got to have a set of orders, optional roll, and a set of casualties, there's an optional roll to get away from that. The trade-offs of putting some of that information over here might be more reasonable. The fact that the firepower strength stays the same no matter what, though, makes that a good element to have on the front. The melee strength, maybe that should be expressed on here, because you got to look at the casualty results. On the other hand, because of the configurations of the game, you could be playing where casualties are recorded right on the counters. Now, that creates an additional problem. The way you record them there is you put a number counter underneath. That immediately starts causing problems. You can't do the fatigue rule. You will definitely come up into conflicts of interest with that. Any kind of stacking, you're going to come up with conflicts where you don't know whose counter something is. So that option is a dangerous one in a lot of ways. And I think what they should have done was move the melee values over here, maybe some other things. But that becomes problematic because the melee values change based on the formation that you're in. And that's expressed by the side of the counter. And I mean, it's just this tangled, web of things that lead to this design. And the design may lead to some of the decisions on how the design of the counters may have led to some of the decisions on how the system would work as well. It's all kind of an integrated tangle. It's just, when it comes about to it, you need to have these bigger counters. You need to have, in order to have the numbers, there's too many numbers for my poor little brain. And then you need to have the bigger hexes. Therefore, the maps take up a lot more footprint. Therefore, there's less room for these things. And I mean, it explains why Leipzig is like, I think, a 9 mapper. I don't know if it's 9. I don't know. It's big. It's big. And I'm afraid I won't be able to play it here. We'll see. I might be able to play it on the floor, either here or downstairs. But yeah, if it's... if you're talking about half or a quarter the number of maps, it becomes a much, much more manageable game. Size. Anyway, where the hell were we? Yes, I'm doing another cav charge against these guys, and I wanted to look up some rules, and I moved those things. And the rule I wanted to look up has to do with the morale check for forming squares. It had to do with the distance that you're going to go. And this is part of why I'm chatty. I almost always add crap about my life recently, but this game has been bringing forward certain little aspects that, on re-examining the system, I'm beginning to find, those are kind of irritating factors. And it's always easier to deal with irritating factors, but I was so excited about Napoleonic, maybe in the earlier ones, Napoleonic games with orders that feel like a system that maybe it's not quite as good as NBS for my tastes, but comes close enough, and it's still alive. It's still producing games. I don't have to try to deal with the horror of the Labatt system, with its, ridiculous levels of worrying about the minuscule factors of maneuver, right? It really, really gets too deep into that. And at least from the Dresden one, the only one I played, the rules are a fucking complete mess. Although I pulled out one of the regimental series rules, and those were in much better shape. Still very, very, very finicky and mechanically complex, mainly because of the maneuver stuff, but other factors as well that just... And then, again, some of the design choices. Like, let's use the front of the counter and have no information on it, and put all the information on the back. Basically, the front of the counter is almost a hidden counter situation in that game. I have no idea why. That thing needs to be redesigned as far as I'm concerned. And then I would have been able to add orders to it in order to get the extent. And then the OSG games, which are just way too light, But yeah, let me... So I needed the space to get this, and this pile is what is preventing me from having that space. And I want it to check squares, which means I have to flip around and find the cav charge, just where it has it. And if the cav is adjacent to the target, so here is the problem. I think I don't get a square. Infantry at the start of the charge. Okay, I can do it back here. Excellent. Yeah, that's the kind of thing I needed to check. I have no modifier here, but a 9 morale. Am I fatigued? Because then I have to look up that roll. Not yet. Okay, so we form a square with this. But here's the thing. The unit has not been declared, which means I might as well try to make a square with that, but I don't know if I can see that. Yeah, it feels like he's on top of the hill. I can still see him. He does not, and he gets a disorder for that. That's not good. This guy is not in any kind of terrain. That can still be charged. Oh, what did I roll? I don't know. I hope that was actually a failure, because I've got a +1 on these. This guy forms a square. Why am I forming squares with everything? Because I'm threatened by charges everywhere. Because this is probably actually facing like this at the beginning of the charge. Now, I assume I can form a square if I'm in column. Yeah. And I got a morale check bonus on this, which I think applies. I don't know what that bonus is, so I gotta look. It's gonna be on the other side of him. It's gonna be a 4. He will automatically form a square. And this may cause the charge to be called off at this point. Calling it off would require disordering the cav. I have a good target, that disordered unit. It doesn't fall back yet. We will continue with the charge against that. Everything else has thrown itself in. This is a disordered unit. I could keep attacking it, but it's allowed to keep blowing and running away because it's cav. I could attack this thing. I think I've got line of sight there. Oh, I don't need line of sight. Charge range is the issue here. And this requires me looking in multiple books. It's based on movement and turns. number of turns that I can make. So now I look at the light fog. That's going to be my range roll, which is 4 hexes. And this is a cav. I could be facing that way. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not in range, so I cannot launch a charge against that. And this is, you can see, not only a fairly interactive, but a sort of complex process with lots of die rolls. Lots of units can be affected by it. So you saw a whole string of square formation checks based on one cav unit moving. It's the games that handle the combat in detail enough, and for this I'm going to say this, NBS, Labatt, all have, Wellington's Victory, all have this heavy, heavy burden because of the way the cav charges have to be dealt with in the system. And the cav charges are effective enough, unlike, say, if you go back to musket and pike, where this kind of charge doesn't really happen in the same way. You still have cav charges and threats and whatnot, but you're usually trying to get around the back. You're not trying to just bust up a unit straight on, because you usually have a big pike formation facing the enemy in the front. And likewise, in the Great Northern War, Spanish Succession games that I've seen, the cav just doesn't have that big an impact. So there's not that kind of threat where you want the whole front to just, yeah, those cav might be coming. Let's try, you know. Anyhow, we found a target, and that's what's good. No cav charges here, so we go to the movement, and I've spent a lot of video on something that narratively is just a kind of little thing. I could have just come in with, yeah, the cav threatened, it created a bunch of squares, and nothing else happened, or something like that. It's hard for me to do that. I'm hoping to be able to get to that level of abstraction in the videos as I become an old hand at this or whatever. Okay. Get a couple of weird situations here, but anyway. Prussians pulling back en masse here, and I'm thinking about, wow, I'm taking this, you know, fatigue level after fatigue level as I'm moving Hohenlohe's big formation. It's going to be hard to rest, it's going to be hard to manipulate, it's going to be hard to create a defensive line. Everything becomes difficult when you have such sort of monolithic units, right? I mean, everything on the board is under him. And that means if I move one piece a few hexes, you know, or more than half its movement, or if I engage in any kind of melee, although I think that's pretty unlikely. But pretty much anything that I'm doing is going to be problematic and is going to cause me fatigue. I don't know if the fatigue is forced by the forced routing unit. I would give myself a pass on that. But yeah, that's a problem. I didn't get to rally anything, I don't think. I think I gotta be careful there. I gotta find the rally rules, which are somewhere. Because I moved all those disordered units. But let's see, at least 2 full turns, yeah. So actually that's not an issue. Anyhow, and I think I would be able to anyway. Okay. But yeah, so much of my force has been disorganized just last turn that we're pulling back pretty hard. These guys are also leaving. This is going to leave Napoleon with a situation where his orders kind of no longer work, and he's going to have to throw some orders out to other people. I also have orders checks coming up. Came up with a partial solution. I can keep things there. It's not someplace I can write and spread the charts out, but at least it's not causing me the same issue. Over here, that cav charge didn't rout the unit. It caused a morale check, caused a couple casualties in exchange for one. You know, it's still got to butcher its way through a big infantry unit. It's not a pleasant, charges aren't just like, whoopee, we hit something, they're not perfect situations. I wanted to check that because I needed to see if the infantry disorganized, it has a melee value of 1, but it's still multiplied by the steps as far as I can tell. If it wasn't, it would be pretty damn messy. I think hitting routed units, I think the routed units have a case where, yeah, you get to fuck them up pretty bad. But then I'm left sitting here. And that is not the best place in the world to be. This artillery could unlimber. I'm facing two squares that could fire into me, and I can't do any countercharge, not even against the artillery unlimbering. So I blew that cav. It gets set with a turn earlier's disorder number. And you can't have disordered and non-disordered stacked, if I recall correctly. So it had to run an extra hex back. Whew. Now, that's where it's that final rule that you can't have disordered and non-disordered, which is kind of weird. Because, and this kind of came up in a question, although I don't think it was phrased quite this way. I had some infantry here that's disordered, is going to have to run away. Normally, it would run immediately. But it shouldn't be disordering the artillery under it. And that was kind of the argument that was made by the designer. The specific cases had to do with unlimbered artillery, that if a unit failed its morale check and got up and packed away, the crew would stay at their guns. Okay. But would this, disorder at turn 7 or whatever, the artillery stack? I don't know. That makes, the rule that you can't have disordered and non-disordered units makes things work a little bit better if you've got casualties under units. I still don't know if it completely absolves the situation. Because I don't know whether or not one disorder counter is all you need, because here's the thing, you could have different terms of rally on them. And that could cause problems, but those get resolved, whatever. So I don't think I have any rallies here. It's hard to tell because I'm in turn 9, the 9 a.m. turn, which says turn 3, but it's actually turn 7. So I have to look. I don't see anything earlier than turn 6 on the board, so I'm not going to get any rally chances. And that is going to push me to this 9:30 turn, and I've got a mess of units here. I don't know. I'm going to have to look them up and see what they're meant to represent. And then I've got another stack. Murat's Cav is coming in. Wow. I mean, Ho and Low is just so fucking ho. It's just Jena is not a situation that the Prussians can win. And I mean, the victory conditions support that. It's how long can you fucking hold out on the board? But we'll see. We'll see if I can hold out long enough to get my reinforcements in place and start heading back over to Auerstaedt. See, this is interesting. So here's what happened on my video. I had Auerstaedt spelled A-U-E. I don't know if I had the E, but I had S-T-A-D-T. Someone replied back that it's S-T-E-D-T, and they may have also gotten that one. They got it right in terms of the E. I don't know if I had gotten that wrong. Yeah. So this has it with an A in there as well as an E, which, but yeah, I guess in modern German, that A is not there or something. It'd be interesting if I get a response on that. Anyway, no matter what, I had it wrong. There's no question. I just had it in my mind as how you would pronounce it, and I don't know if I got the E right. I certainly didn't get. I only had the A here, which is probably almost completely wrong. Okay. The lights out and realized, hey, wait a minute. There's something fucked up here. There's something that I haven't said that I want to say. I make a lot of harshing on the Labatt system. Here's the thing. It's not that much more complicated than this. It's got these more complicated dealings with, how much you have to pay for maneuvering. It's got a lot more units on the board, which has its own burden once you get to that regimental size. But that doesn't seem like that big a burden. But here's the problem. When you're doing those cav charges, you have a lot of shit up in the air. You're juggling a lot of balls in the air when you're doing some of this interactive stuff. And that extra burden of the extra maneuver costs, etc., and the higher movement point values that have to support the kind of discrimination that it has, they end up pushing that burden just a little too far for me. And then you add other things, look, the counter design for them is just hideous. Not in an aesthetic sense. It's beautiful in an aesthetic sense. You got all these pretty uniforms or flags or whatever. But in terms of being able to obtain the information you need to play the game. And again, there it's trying to represent the kind of view that you get in a minis game where you have all these pretty figures and everything. Well, I don't know. The minis games I've played have been more at this level or lighter. I haven't played many that are really as detailed as that. So it's not that big a deal to be facing something that's hard to see. And also, your cav, your artillery, they're clearly distinguished in minis. You can see by the figures what you got. The other thing you have, the thing that's not immediately necessary to see is, I've got these painted correctly, and that's a nice to have, but not necessary to play. You could play with unpainted figures as far as I'm concerned, or just, one color to indicate side or something. Obviously, when you're going into the expensive minis and building terrain and everything, you want it to look as beautiful as possible. But it's as beautiful as possible within the realm of what is still playable. And to me, the Labatt system loses that playability because the counters don't look like anything that gives me any information about the game. All they are is giving me that purely visual of what the uniform looks like. That's horrible. I wrote on some orders, pushing a little further and then back down towards the Auerstaedt or whatever here. Auerstaedt. What's his name here? Augereau and Ney. They both have fairly limited goals to move up to this river line. I could issue new orders. Might make sense for Augereau, but here's the thing. Both of these units could use a rest. So maybe I'll just leave them alone without orders for a little bit. Napoleon's pretty good at lending orders. And there's another thing is, the road up to, can't remember the towns ever, Apolda, is the way onto the Auerstaedt map. If I can dispatch a corps over there, that maybe makes Davout's job a little easier because it's not looking so hot right now. Now, Davout has a pretty powerful little corps, but he's facing what supposedly is the main Prussian army. And it doesn't look all that much bigger than this, but whatever. The army is so disorganized that it's kind of hard to tell. Anyway, that runs me into a difficulty, though, which is who's in command if I send another marshal out here? Who's in charge? And I don't think the game gives that rule. I'll look that up a little later, but right now, what I'm worried about is the arrival of these 930 orders. So, what do we do here? The obedience is indicated on the back of the leader's counter. All right, that's going to be the number down there. So I don't have to worry about Lan. He's facing the emperor front on and has to follow the orders. But how well do orders get to, well, Lefebvre? He's a 5. That's pretty good. And I don't think there are any modifiers on here. Okay, so Lefebvre is going to follow his orders. And who else? And those will start next turn. Who else was getting any? Soule was getting new orders. He might not be quite as responsive. There he is. Yeah, he's only a 4. It's sort of the default for the French army. And he too will be following his orders next turn. He may be able to rest this turn because he succeeded in his goal, which was to outflank this? No. It couldn't have been it. It's this line that was intended to be outflanked. Should be using blue for this. Okay. The thing I can find about army command on Auerstaedt is if Bernadotte enters there, and that's one of the scenario options, is that he can enter there. He can become the army commander there. Well, yeah, but there's a seniority among the corps commanders, and pretty sure Davout is damn low on that seniority, but Ney is also not all that high. So I would have to, it's not reflected in the game in any way, but I could probably look up and say this person would be given orders to either subordinate themselves or to take command. And you couldn't really violate. I mean, Napoleon could order whatever he wants, but if he gave orders that violated the natural order, I think there might be a penalty. There might be a penalty anyway. So maybe I can assign either one, and the other one is going to be at a subordination penalty of, say, 1 or something. Making up rules as I go. But you really can't have two guys who are in command of themselves fully sitting on the board. That's going to give too much of an advantage. That's like going to, what is it, orders level 2 or whatever, where they just have to stay in command control. When I look at the rules for the interaction between the maps, beyond the time that it takes, which is basically a 2.5 hour for the French to cross, which, you know, I mean, we started at 6, we're at 9:30, I guess now. I don't know. It's hard to tell from that one. Yeah, we're at 9:30. You know, we've done 3.5 hours of game so far, and there's still quite a bit left. So a quick rush up there and across might make some sense. is it justifiable? Do the French know, what they're facing here is not much? And worse, do they have any idea that Davout is facing, a larger force all by himself? Not historically. They were rather surprised. But then if we go here, if units exit the road where enemy reinforcements are supposed to enter, they're traded off on a 1-to-1 ratio. Okay. And then it kind of tries to go into what's going to happen. The French units are not counted as losses. Okay, that matters. But the Prussian units count towards the number of units to exit to win. Well, first of all, generally the French units, at least in the scenarios I'm playing, it doesn't matter what you lose. So here, the idea is to destroy, to panic, or whatever the term is. It's not panic, it's something else, but the Prussian army, to get it to that 2/3 losses or whatever. I think. I don't know. Because now I'm confused, because there's demoralize and there's something else. And that something else is, I think, the target we're aiming for number-wise. Okay. But whatever the names and whatever, which it would require me to flip through the books and search and everything to find, there really isn't a whole hell of a lot of effect towards French losses. There's a significant effect towards Prussian losses. And if we look at, do we have victory conditions on these other ones? I think so. Yeah. Which is, again, 2/3 of the Prussian units are destroyed or disorganized. Well, yeah, that's the level we're talking about. It doesn't matter how many French units are destroyed. It matters how many Prussian units are destroyed. And they don't even address that in this rule. The French units are not counted towards losses here. The only thing that's addressed is Prussian units withdrawing from the map, which give you victory points. Which is fine. It's units that were due to come on that never did, therefore they don't have to be withdrawn. Okay, that makes sense, but what does it have to do with destruction of the army? It may be a bad move in terms of destruction of the army, because those units cannot count, I think, as Prussian losses either. If they're not actually fighting each other, they just can't count. In which case part of the Prussian army is escaping that otherwise wouldn't have. That's what reason tells me. Unreason tells me, well, I ought to be worried about, whether I've demoralized, whatever the proper term is. It's not demoralized. Demoralized is the level 1. It's something else. Flight or something like that. If I've pushed the army to that 2/3 level that's functioning, I've won the battle. And the time that I win the battle should be important. But the goal is to destroy the Prussian army, not just push it back, not just win the battle. So, I think reason makes sense to read it the way it does, or the way I'm reading it. Similarly, if both armies exit the map toward one another, 1-to-1 cancellation, and there's technically no combat off map, if you follow, they don't, even if the French beat them, are able to move off quicker, they just kind of show up on the new map and fight there, as were. Again, especially when we get to the specific rules for this thing, as opposed to, the standard rules have gone through so many years of refinement, etc., that there aren't many holes in them, but they're messy like the Dresden rules were, in terms of making a lot of sense. And in fact, there's actually one of the reinforcements this turn is a unit that was entered before, but it's pretty easy to figure out what the unit should be. It's just a typo type thing. But there are things like that in here as well, though they could be figured out more easily than they were in Dresden. Where am I? I'm looking for cav attacks, and whether, so like Davout here, I don't know if I want to pursue the policy that I'm following. I feel like I'm kind of outgunned right now, and this other thing is going to come in, and I may just get my ass handed to me. The reason, but right away, really. You notice something. This is why I never put my, I don't know if you can see this. The writing is upside down when you put it this way. And, being an ASP, of course, everything, or OCD, depends on how you want to look at things, everything has to be done according to the way it should be, right? So the idea that I would put it in upside down, although I put my lock in upside down on my door, somewhat on purpose. Ooh, somebody's out there. Oh my. I think that's a fairly young one. Looking rather bemused all by himself. Okay, so what the fuck was the reason that I wanted to grab the camera? Fuck, now I can't remember. I was talking about Davout getting his ass handed to him, and then I thought of something, and then I got distracted. Ooh. Okay, I'm lost. Great. Look, squirrel. Okay. I do not recall at all. I'm sorry. I was a little wrong on Sewell resting. He's got a big column moving in. I screwed up though. I didn't have to bring that whole column. I didn't have to move that column at full speed because with the fatigue rules, buried in here somewhere, and it's the only time it affects it, is if you move less than half your movement allowance with, you see, this is worded kind of weird. A corps which moves more than half their movement allowance gets a fatigue point. If you move less than half your movement allowance, you get an extra movement point. So what that means is these units, it really doesn't make much difference. These units could have moved 3 hexes, 3 movement points, because less than and more than, I would be moving exactly half, so I get no bonus. But with units with an odd number of movement points, boy, is that obnoxious. Like, my feeling is I should be able to get 4 movement points on the road with these guys, because they're faster units, and they're being, not pushed harder. They're moving on easier terrain, so they should get some of the benefit from that without the fatigue level. I'm not quite sure what that odds issue happens. You know what it is? It's a rounding up. It's a rounding up issue is what it is. You can basically move more than half your movement allowance at about the same speed as the French can. So, okay, I can accept it tactically or whatever. What do we got for fighting? Davout has decided indeed to press the attack a little bit and pushing forward. I'm not going to do counter battery fire because counter battery fire is particularly ineffectual. Instead, I'd rather pick off the units that are not artillery. Are the Prussians going to do counter battery? Maybe, because this is one of the few things that can hurt them. But on the other hand, beating up the infantry, takes away the real offensive capability of that French force if it wants to push up against my line. Over here, we've got kind of a pursuit going on, and like I said, Sewell couldn't fully rest, so I just didn't really push ahead beyond what I see as I solidified my line, is how I see it. Might be a little bit of cheat in there, but what that means is very little, because this is all 5th Corps here that's continuing the attack into Krippendorf, and they're allowed to do that. thing that I was thinking about, and then I just proceeded with it, and I'm not sure I want to do that. So I moved a square and some skirmishers up. As that square is starting to enter, I have the ability to say, you know what, I'm going to blow my cav. And I think I'm going to do that. This is turn 8, I believe. Not easy to see here, but it is over there. So that means I get a turn 7, not a turn 6 marker, and throw him back. The reason is, otherwise I'm going to be coming into fire or have to charge a square, and charging a square is not a good thing. One of the big factors, and I'm trying to remember what all affects it, first of all, I lose the bonus for fighting against infantry that's not a square. I will also be in my column formation where I don't have my full melee. Well, no, because I would reaction charge. I would be okay. Maybe it's worth doing, but there's a real problem here that I'm trying to remember. I'm having a hard time finding this. Yes. So the square gives a bonus to morale for the cav, but somewhere or another, the cav gets a penalty on its morale check. Oh, God. I can't remember how to find this. I stumbled across this. The cav is penalized when it's hitting a square. Is that just in charge? Maybe. Oh, God. Ah, fuck. I saw something that convinced me that, like, yeah, there is actually a really bad reason. Square infantry versus cav. I remember something being horrible here. Fuck. Here it is. Battle. Yes. That's what it is. So if you're attacking into square or into some of the bad terrain, your base combat value is just 1 for a charge. That's what's ugly. So it's worse than like defending against it. So there's just, you don't want to be advanced on by squares. And the point is, once the infantry's in the square, it's pretty damn safe. There's no, I know some systems have a, mini systems that I've played have kind of this idea of, and this is an interesting thing historically, that, look, the cav, the main reason it fails against the square is the horses won't go. They won't go into that dense pike formation. And I think musket and pike handles this, by the way. But what it comes down to is, does the horse's momentum carry them into the square? If it does, they probably still break it. And so there was kind of this, what happened was you attacked a square, you rolled a die, the horses either didn't make it, in which case they kind of bounced off of it, took some casualties, took a morale check, whatever. Or they made it in and they pretty much beat up the infantry just about as bad as if it hadn't been in a square at all. But it was unlikely that they would make it in. But every now and then it was worth doing, as a risky maneuver. I don't think this melee table with those numbers really reflects that kind of situation. But it was kind of an interesting mechanism as far as I was concerned. Anyway, definitely pulling out of there. Using way too many words again. At some point I'm going to just be able to give you the narrative of what happens without all the detail. But I'm still stumbling and trying to get the gears to click together as I try to see how these mechanisms work together. And whenever I'm doing that, I feel like I have to zoom in Because if I'm having trouble understanding it, or if I've said something wrong before, I need to either correct it or further clarify it or whatever, or keep nailing it in, you know? Because if I can't understand it, I'm assuming other people, for whatever reason, are almost as dense as I am. Here's the problem I have with the half-loss artillery roll. If I fire counter battery, each point of damage I do is only half a loss, as opposed to when I'm firing musket fire and I'm wiping out the crew, I'm much, much more effective. That makes sense, but this artillery is sitting either right in front of or embedded in a line of infantry. And what it feels like to me is, okay, maybe I'm only doing half a loss to the artillery, but I'm probably also doing some damage to the infantry there too. And that's something that's not accounted for here. I think, again, CWB and NBS handle that a little bit better with casualties kind of being split between them or whatever. I just am of the feeling that, you know, yeah, shooting artillery is incredibly effective because it only takes 2 hits to knock out 6 firepower, right? That's a big deal. But if I do it with my artillery, it takes 4 hits. And that becomes less of an advantage. Of course, I force it to make a morale check, but its morale doesn't get worse and la la la, so yeah. I also have to worry about the fatigue. What is the effect of that fatigue? Because we got guys who are fatigued. I think it reduces their morale. And I flip through rules back and forth looking for it. Oh, I've been doing this wrong. I've been putting, I'm going to continue with the way I'm doing it. But I've been putting the unit, the fatigue marker, the lower value, the 1s digit if you want in base 5, is supposed to be under the counter, under the leader. The 5s digit is on top. That, to me, causes even greater likelihood of confusion. It's a morale decrease. That is the only effect. Each level is a morale decrease. And for some reason, provisional corps are under the fatigue rules. I guess primarily so that you can, yeah, it seems to be that they've just become free. Like they're not bound to fatigue at all. That's kind of weird. It feels weird to me, whatever the hell they're doing there. And you're only allowed 1 per battle, whatever that means. There's restrictions against them in this, like Hohenlohe can't do it. I assume Davout can't, although I don't remember that. Okay, so yeah, I mean, given the ineffectiveness of counter battery fire in this system, it's either ineffective or it's too effective. If you don't play with the optional rule, busting up artillery is trivial, right? You never. I don't know what you do with your artillery. It's going to die real fast. But otherwise, it's probably not worth doing, which also feels wrong. You know, although at long range it may make sense because you can't. Right? I don't know. No. Well, the infantry can't hit you, but so what? Shot and got a casualty. But I realize what it is when I look at these columns. There's a level of command that's missing that's present in the CWB NBS stuff. The division. There's no divisional commanders. That's what's missing. The level of granularity is the core level here, which feels wrong for brigade level counters. And I think that's really what we're looking at, because these columns have no reason to stick together. There's nothing in the rules that makes columns within the Corps, which are essentially divisions of the Corps, to be able to operate as sort of separate units to any degree. And that reduces your flexibility, but it also means that the granularity for things like fatigue and whatnot become more painful. Of course, that would require more counters for a game that the base system doesn't even use the leaders. Cut down a little bit. So Brunswick got killed first turn that he could get killed. Not a big deal. The king, I mean, it sort of sucks, I guess. I mean, I don't know. He's got a combat bonus that the king doesn't, but the king's got a better morale bonus. And I don't know if he has values. No, he's the army commander. So, yeah. Hohenlohe shouldn't be, because Hohenlohe should be able to be a corps commander in this, but he's not marked as such. Because if you're combining the leaders into a single army, there should be one army commander. And giving Hohenlohe those asterisks and saying he doesn't accept orders, I don't know how that works, but whatever. We'll worry about that if we were. It makes sense in the historical. It doesn't make sense for all of the potential scenarios. And maybe they tell you, hey, use these values, but I doubt it. The rules don't seem to cover that many of the cases that would arise if you tried using anything other than one of the two battle scenarios. And even if you're trying to do those, they don't really align with like the individual like slices of the battle scenarios very well, and not for any good reason. Anyway, he wrote some orders to take an offensive, actually, and moving forward, but also launched a charge which disrupted the right flank of the French army, which did not put itself into a square to begin with, and positioning up further. I think Davout's in trouble. I think the king's going to beat him up. Over here, largely withdrawing, we did, and positioning our line. We did get a retreat over here from the guy who was kind of the deepest in the doo-doo. And that's about it. And I guess we go to fire. There shouldn't... Well, you know, the Prussians actually unlimbered some cannons that I think may be in range to fire. I'll have to look at the fog rolls and whatnot to make sure. But this is still fighting. I said I didn't think there was a flank effect for melee. Anyway, there isn't for fire, and I think that's what I was actually finding. I found the one for melee, you're halved in combat, which seems about right. That's, so, yeah. Things are spaced in different places, and when you want to look something up because you don't absolutely know it, one of the places that you look is all the different formations for all the different units. That's where this was. Not under any facing rules, if there are any. I mean, so they've got facing under movement, but I think the main concept of facing is handled in the per unit side, which isn't a problem. It's just, I'm not sure that I realized that when I looked it up before, and I almost just gave them their full melee strength. By having it, it meant that an infantry in line was worth 1. This cav managed to bust through 2 units, routing the one that was already disordered, disordering another one, and taking and capturing the cannons as well. When cannons disorder in place, when they're unlimbered, the crew runs away from the guns. You can spike the guns that way. Boom. It looks like Davout is just completely destroyed here. I think his force is probably facing. It's hard to tell because I don't know. You know, there's a bunch of units that aren't on the board yet. So I would have to count what I'm looking at here against that. So we're looking at the Army morale level. And to find this out, it's either half or 2/3 for the two issues. How many units does he have? Well, which units count? It's just units as far as I can tell. I don't think it's anything else. So we're looking at this. So that's 1, 5, 9, 13, 16. I got 20 units total on the board. And I have damaged 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So on the other hand, like, no, that's not units on the board. That's including the ones that haven't come in yet. If I looked at what was just on the board, this isn't disorganized, even though Davu looks like he's disorganizing it. We'd be looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 undisorganized, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 disorganized, or worse, plus 1 destroyed. I don't know what you do when units aren't in the battle yet, whatever, but it would make sense to do it either way, to take the disorganization and say, wow, we've suffered a big setback here. Until we get reinforcements, we're in trouble. Now, it doesn't apply yet, and it wouldn't anyway, but I think the intention is actually for the entirety of the force. So if there's off-board stuff, whatever, and that could include stuff that is kind of not in play because it got canceled out or something like that. Those don't count as casualties. They just count as maneuvering around, dealing with each other off board. Oh, I got some rallies to do. I haven't done many of them. So we got this guy. He can rally. He does not. Now, I want to see failure. Yep, failure requires a retreat. Yay. It doesn't change the time limit or anything like that. And then we got some up here that I'm rallying. Not the double 9s. Those can't rally yet. So this guy's an 8. He'll rally. Which way do I want him facing? Like that, he's artillery. This guy here. 8. That doesn't work. Which way do we go? I don't know. He's already made his movement for the turn. This one here, Ho and Low, should be adding 1. He's got an 8. That gives him a 7 total. So he rallies as well. That doesn't unfatigue anyone, though. What is this? That's Cav. I don't know whose Cav it is. But I'm trying to see. It's this unit, which is, I think, the guys who are fleeing back. It doesn't really matter. I don't. Again, it's all Ho and Low, so I don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. But I kind of have been because I don't know. I honestly do not know. And that ends this turn. What I'm doing from now on is I'm recording the turn number over here on a counter, just because that makes life easier. And then this should be turn 9 as well, way up here. Oh, boy. So, what have we seen? Well, we've seen Davu pretty much broken and in a lot of trouble. To be honest, a lot of trouble. And over here, Ho and Low's army is reeling back from Napoleon, as to be expected. What can we do about that? Don't know. Really don't know. But yeah, if the king with the main army can manage certain stuff. We should be in, there aren't a lot of French coming any longer. If he can continue to beat up Davout and win this now with that structure, this huge, fairly large, not as good a force, but he's had this cav advantage over there, and you can see how potent cav can be. I mean, I just basically broke up, a whole side of the line with the cav, and firepower also drove things back, so that helps as well. And I guess we'll be moving into, what is that, the 10 a.m. turn, I guess. The rules for, as I move into the 10 o'clock turn for the French, the rules for failure are a little different than you see in the CWB NBS stuff. Those games force failure on you. You have to pursue your goals until either you get new goals, which could be an initiative order base, or your core fails at the attempt, and there's these attack and potentially defense failure rolls that take place. Here, you're allowed to just stop your core. However, you must continue for at least 3 turns, which is problematic for poor Davout here, except he could cancel his orders because he's on his own. He's in command on his own, which I may well do, because... So here's the thing. The cav is pretty much worn out now. That's an appealing factor. However, and I'm thinking that I screwed something up. It's this unit that's worrying me, but I think that blew an earlier turn. However, I should have been able to roll a recovery on it last turn, and I don't believe I did. It does. What I was going to say is that, with the cav mostly blown, maybe the problem is out of the way, and I can try to use my forces to push through, but, geez, man, that looks rough. Just my army is so beaten up, and there are still a couple of cav tracing out there, causing issues. So I may want to fall back and try to defend now. What was really easy, which was solving, the approach to battle scenario, whatever that is here, the opening moves through the fog. Well, it was so easy that the Prussians didn't bother trying to win it, because there's no way they could, basically. Which means that Blucher's cav is not all wrecked and is not down in strength and is available now that I have infantry ready to play out. Probably a good reason not to do what I did. Probably you either want to play that opening moves through the fog, and which is, how the game is designed, or play the full Auerstaedt scenario that starts after the effects of that have taken place. Otherwise, you'd have to have additional rules that are in here to force Blucher to push harder than the rules that are in place do. Crap me. Road, you remember what I was saying about you get an extra movement point if you move half? Well, if you move full on the road, you get 2 extra movement points. I've been ignoring that. That probably hurts the French, just in terms of things like Soul's force moving forward and such not. I just didn't think about that. That seems kind of odd to me. Not really, but I'm not used to it in the tactical, more detailed stuff. I'm used to it more in things like the OSG games, but I think the French are doing well enough here. Didn't make too much of a difference there. We'll leave that up to the delay factors, I guess. Milan with fatigue penalties are marching into Hohenloh's force. One of the things is if both sides are fighting, right, both sides take fatigue penalties. So it may not matter too much. The thing is that if the attacker has to suffer them first, essentially, because remember, they're morale check penalties. So if you're launching an attack and you're fatigued, well, you'll be moving in and taking defensive fire first. So eventually the fatigue ends up high enough that everybody just kind of squats and takes a break for a little while. But here's the thing, that monolithic formation that Hohenlohe has, and it's getting oozed into with skirmishers in the woods and whatnot, is a lot harder. It can be hit with an echelon type formation by the French, where one unit hits, recovers, another unit hits, and that can make a significant difference because that monolithic core, as you would, is just incapable of recovering so long as it's being hit anywhere on the line. What do we got going on? We got the guards are moving somewhere. They're here. Aguilar is here. He's going to be getting some orders from Napoleon. I think Ney's going to be getting some written orders, perhaps, or maybe not. One of the problems is all these units really could use a rest, but I could also advance, and as long as there's nothing facing me, it might be worth making that extra ground. Soul's corps is more problematic, in part because they were slow marching. They've got orders to work their way up this channel, which is not the best way to get where they're going. And they're all attacking up this way and around. Murat, I don't need orders for. I'm going to use him to try to screw around with the flank, the dangling cav there. I've got more cav than the Prussians do, and should be able to get behind the Prussian army and cause it some serious pain there. For Davout, my new orders don't take effect. I scared off the cav. That's one of the cool things. Like I said, some of the cav was disordered. Well, the disordered cav can't stick around and fight, and I move a square up. That unit fled. Another unit fled when I marched up behind disordered units. That whole kind of trickery, maybe I shouldn't have called off my attack, but I'm setting up for a defense around Hassenhausen. I feel like I have to recover from this mess before I can launch another attack. And if I'm receiving, I assume I'm going to be doing more damage to the Prussians than they do to me. I may be a little too scared of infantry and skirmishers and whatnot, but I've got like a disordered unit that could end up routing if it doesn't flee. The Russians tried to launch a charge against the light cav here on their side of the turn. They got countercharged, they defeated the cav, but then they're left up here where they don't really want to be in front of some artillery, etc. So I fled by blowing the cav, which didn't really do much, but you can see I set things up here to begin the assault on the French position. I don't know how strong this is, but we'll see. But then I came over to this map, and I handled everything except the fire, well, everything up to the fire phase over here. But then over here, I was reminded of something that I don't think I complained about in this session, the videos that I've done so far in it, but I do think I did earlier at some, maybe a very early incarnation of when I was playing these, which was, oh wow, look, the forests, the woods give you a defensive bonus, a la Terrible Swift Sword type games. Does that really make sense? Dean Essig made a really good argument about, look, people didn't deploy their lines a few feet into the forest to get some kind of protection from the wood or whatever. When they were fighting in front near a forest, the lions tried to push outside the forest. They didn't take cover inside. They may have used it as a backdrop that they could fall back into for defense, but essentially, if you were firing back and forth in front of a forest, you would be at the edge of the forest. You wouldn't be inside it. Well, in this game, it allows you to, and it looks like it's a good thing because it gives you a -1 defense, but it only gives you a 1 offense, which is really, really horrible. So I'm falling back out of these forests. The Prussians deployed themselves inside the woods because I had some sort of view that I would get some sort of defensive benefit from that. Instead, I'm falling back, force the French to push through the forest or into the forest, and they will actually be at a disadvantage because of that. Does that make a lot of sense either? Nah, not really. I like the Essig solution better, which is just if you're at the edge of the forest, you're outside the forest. But at least you're not hiding in the forest to try to defend yourself. Although it's perfectly fine for the skirmishers. It doesn't make a damn bit of difference. They can't get shot anyway. But that means I'm taking withdrawal fire from this artillery as I fall back. It's the same situation in the towns. Again, it might make sense if you send some skirmishers out in front of you, but this is not a strong point. And I've been holding the view in my head that, oh yeah, villages, strong points. Maybe too much from, some of those Spanish succession type games that I was playing. But I'm also thinking about the Waterloo situation where the chateau is like, this real strong point. Well, villages are not. They're kind of questionable. What about the broken terrain? What about rough terrain? Is that just good stuff? That counts as cultivated here. Yeah, that's just good stuff. That gives you a defensive bonus that is good. Now, the village gives you additional bonuses. It's a -2 to the attack, which is pretty potent, as well as no morale check. Well, +2 to morale. So I will live with sitting in the villages, but the woods definitely are not good. Again, the vagaries of the system are things that you learn, and you learn by making horrible mistakes, basically. In fact, after fire, I can see we blew a hole in the French line. But not much effect, we're withdrawing here. Here, you can see that not much was being driven forward. One thing we're seeing, though, is we've come out of that light fog, and now it's clear. And that means whatever the fog rules were aren't applying anymore, and I'm not sure what they were and how much I've internalized. And one that I know I've internalized is the range of the artillery, which, I'm just at, artillery's at range 4 or whatever. Well, now I got to worry, all the different artillery units have different ranges in this game, and you have to look at them, and it's based on how powerful they are. Let me see if there's anything else that I missed with the fog. Cav charge distance, I think it goes to 5 hexes instead of 4. And that's it. So yeah, we should be okay. Yeah, I know there's some special rules, and I'm probably not paying attention to all of them. I got the big Brunswick dies one. I got that out of the way at least. I think we're going to load this one up now. They're already starting to fire things off. It's probably close to an hour early, but whatever. People like their fireworks. Okay, let's send it up.